My mother begged me not to go. The Japanese woman who married Koreans and never saw their family again. M left Japan in 1960 for a new life in North Korea. Once there, she realized she and hundreds of others like her could never go back. It has been 6 decades since MM boarded a ferry on the Sea of Japan coast.
Coast.
Coast. Bound for a new life in North Korea, but the anguish of that sunny day in the spring of 1960 has never left her. 2 months earlier, M had married a Korean man, CHJ, a contemporary at H University, where she was the only woman in a class of 100 students. M, then 21, the, the sea were part of the mass repatriation of ethnic Korean residents of Japan, many of them the offspring of people who had been brought from the Korean Peninsula by their Japanese colonizers to work in mines and factories. More than 93,000 Afro-Koreans, known as Z, moved to North Korea between 1959 and 1984, according to the Japanese Red Cross Society. Among them were 1830 Japanese women who, like M, had married a Korean man, and a smaller number of Japanese men with Korean wives. North Korea, founded in 1948 by KIS, welcomed the repatriated Koreans with open arms, even though almost all had family ties to South Korea. In return for helping to rebuild the war-ravaged Democratic People's Republic of Korea, MNC, along with tens of thousands of others, were promised a socialist paradise that the U.S. oppressed crossings in the capitalist South could only dream of. Irrespective of which side of the border they came from, Koreans in Japan and faced widespread suspicion and discrimination. My husband was Korean and from a poor background. My family was against our marriage and didn't come to our wedding, says M, one of 8 women whose lives in North Korea have been documented by the award-winning Japanese photo, photographer N.H.
Photographer.
Photographer, Japanese photographer. My mother cried and said, "Please don't go. Think about what you're doing." When I remember her saying that, I can't help but cry. I was only 21. M took the Korean name KJO. She and her husband, who died in 2014, settled in the eastern port city of W, where he worked as a fisher's officer while she raised their children. H had read about the repatriation program and the fact that the returnees included a Japanese woman who had never before set foot in North Korea, but I had never heard any of these women's personal stories. She explains, I wanted to hear how they felt about Japan 60 years after they left, what they missed, and about their lives in North Korea. North Korea, however, is notoriously notoriously is notoriously difficult to access, particularly for a freelance photographer from Japan. The peninsula's despite the former colonial ruler, the political environment also posed challenges. In 2002, North Korea's then leader KJI admitted the regime's spies had abducted Japanese citizens during the 1970s and 80s. More recently, its nuclear weapons program has invited international condemnation. During her first visit in 2013 with a Japanese NGO, H won over her North Korea guides, explaining that her only intention was to meet the women, listen to their stories, and take their portraits. In the course of 12 subsequent visits, she has interviewed and photographed the women at their homes in the capital P, in Woodsend, and in Hamhung, the country's second largest city. H identified an emotional thread running through all of the women's stories, an often unfulfilled desire to revisit the country of their birth. As a Japanese woman, I felt an emotional bond with their stories, she said. There were many times when I got a grappis, glimpse. Glimpse. I got a glimpse of the feelings they had held deep in their hearts for many years. When they left for North Korea, the women had been led to believe that they would be able to return to Japan for family visits once they had settled into their new lives. Free travel between Japan and the North was impossible. However, since their countries have never had diplomatic ties, ordinary North Korea's movements remain strictly controlled by the regime. Decades on, only 5 of the women each met have made brief returns. In all, 43 Japanese widows have permitted to return to their home country for a few days as part of special homecoming programs held in 1997. 1998 and 2002. The women's encounters with age were a real connection to the hometowns they had left behind. For some, she was their only remaining human connection with the country of their birth. All 8 women she photographed, now in their 70s and 80s, had been ride have had been ride on widowed widowed had been widowed, and 3 have since died. For the past year, H has had to put further visits on hold due to the pandemic. H recalls that they laughed and smiled whenever she visited. holding her hand and introducing her to children and grandchildren. After a royal age, North Korean mothers would leave the room, leaving them to talk freely, but even when alone, Long appear eager to discuss politics or eager to discuss politics or the three generations of the Kim D, who have ruled North Korea for more than 70 years. My intention wasn't to criticize KJ-un's regime, H said. I just wanted to get a sense of the women as people, their emotions, and the environment in which they found themselves. H resolved to rekindle the woman's wedding memories through the photographic, visiting each of their hometowns to echo special praise they had mentioned, which she then reproduced on a huge piece of tripacryl, tarpaulin fabric. They had appeared moved, but perfectly still when I showed them the original photographs. But when I showed them the large pins, their reaction was the exact opposite. They were actively engaged in the photos. They touched them and walked around them, amazed by the cherry blossoms scented perfume. A gift from Edge on a pin of blooming sakura trees that the photographer had shot in her hometown of Est. When they left Japan, they were convinced they would be able to visit freely after a few years, H says, but that didn't happen. Most of their parents opposed their decision to leave, but the woman told them not to worry, that they would see them again in the end. They were not even able to see their parents before they died. They cry every time they talk about this. Anne moved to North Korea with her husband in 1960. After marrying 2 years earlier, her hometown is in Prefecture, southwest Japan. I often went to the shrine with my friends and prayed there when I was little. I was 26 when I met my husband. At first, I didn't realized he was Korean as his Japanese was perfect. He was a really warm person and I fell in love. Anne, whose Korean name is Kas, has not returned to Japan since she left 60 years ago and is unlikely to. Even 1 or 2 hours would have been enough, she says. I just want to visit my hometown and the grave of my father and mother. Other women told each of their longing for the families they had left behind. Fi died in North Korea in 2018. In an interview with H before her death, she spoke about her last meeting with her mother and sister, who visited her in Turkey before she left Japan. We believed that we would meet again in a few years. Since coming to Korea, I have never worked outside, but I like living at home, she told Edge when they met at a cafe in Edge. My husband studied at university and became a doctor. When you get older, you start thinking about the old days in your hometown. T.I. was one of the few women who took part in the homecoming program in 2000. I met my husband when I was around 15, she says. When we were both working as bus drivers, my mother was against my marriage because my husband was Korean. We moved to North Korea in 1961 without telling her. I was her only daughter, so she must have felt very sad and disappointed. She returned to Japan for the first time in 39 years to discover that her mother had died 2 years earlier, aged 99. When I was finally able to visit her grave, I apologized to her. Of all the women she interviewed, H says she found herself most drawn to Anne. She was a very independent woman. She chose to live with the man she fell in love with and build the life she wanted at the age of 21, even though that means being separated from her friends and family in Japan. She said to me, when I left Japan, I was focused on my own happiness, but my mother was incredibly concerned. It was only after I had children of my own that I understood how she felt. Careful to avoid reopening emotional wounds, H never asked anyone directly if they regret leaving Japan. I imagine I imagine that they went crazy when they realized that they might never be able to go back. At the same time, when I saw how they were with their children and grandchildren, I could see that they cherished their lives and families in North Korea. If they were given the chance to visit Japan again, they would. One of them told me that even a short visit would be enough. Then she would be able to die in peace. Two of the five surviving women correspond with their Japanese families by letter. Phone calls are an expensive luxury in North Korea, and email access is a privilege enjoyed only by the political elites in P. The others, including M, have lost touch with their siblings. While H attempts to talk to the woman's relatives in Japan were politely refused, she hopes her portraits will cast light on a neglected chapter in Japanese history. These women have been forgotten in Japan partly because of international political tensions, she says, unless their personal histories are documented now, their experience will die with them. Now 77, M forms a mental picture of the country she left as a young woman whenever she looks out her window over the ocean from her home in Busan. I want to go to Japan one last time, if possible, she says every May when the acacia flowers are in full bloom. I open the window and their fragrance right into my room. Fragrance wafts. Fragrance rolls into my room. Every time that happens, I think of home.